Okay, so this is going to be a video that gives you 3 tips for having better 3D printed designs. What we have on screen right now are a set of um, support struts for the Ender 5 3D printer by Creality. As you can see here, this is the Z-rod that this bracket attaches to, and then this would be where the print bed attaches to the front in those little grippers there. So on the left side, we have the original file that I downloaded, and as far as I know, it works pretty well, which is why I adapted it for my own use. But there are a few issues with it that I wanted to fix before I went ahead and printed them uh, for my printer. So the first thing that I changed are the cutouts. So you'll see on the blue one, there are all these big holes knocked out into the strut. Um, I think those are largely just overkill. Uh, your print will be plenty strong without having all these gigantic holes in it. Um, and each hole represents an entire set of perimeters. So if you were to print this with 3 walls, for example, you'd have 3 layers on all these outer surfaces here. So on this bottom edge, top edge, everywhere, right? And then also on the inside, you'll have another set of 3. So now you're doubling up. And then depending on how small the distance is between these, maybe you'll get some extra infill. So you're really increasing your printing time by a ton. You're increasing the material used by a ton. And another thing is that you're increasing your chances for the print to fail, for example. So each one of these little holes, when it's printed on the bottom, because this is the bottom surface here, when it's printed on the bottom, each one of these is an island. And what that means is there is an opportunity for each of these sets of islands to fail on your first layer. Now, if your printer's nice and it's properly calibrated, that's not a problem. But, if you're going to put this file out there, you have to know that not everybody's printer is going to be as well calibrated as yours. So just keep that in mind when you make your designs to make them as fail-proof as possible. And having all these islands with these struts is not the way to do that. So, oh, and also stringing. You can have a good printer and maybe you just don't have good filament. You can get a ton of stringing in between all these travel moves. And then the more travel moves, the slower it is. The more chances for nozzle collisions or whatever other things that can go wrong. So what I did is I just filled it in. And instead of relying on all these cutouts, I just relied on a big uh, strut. I don't know what you call that. In an injection molding, they have those fins. Whatever. But anyways, it's just one big cutout. So instead of having all those different ones, I just increased the wall density with one cutout that doesn't go all the way through. So there's no islands that can fail on your first layer. And it's just a lot simpler and a lot faster because it's just tons of infill and then the top surface on top. There's no back and forth. Now, what you're looking at, they say, well, actually, you messed up because that is an island. Um, let's see if I can find where that cutout is. Actually, it isn't an island. And that's the number 2 tip that I would give you for better 3D prints is to connect all your islands. Now, what I mean by that is think of, so try to imagine drawing all the perimeters in a single layer without ever lifting up the print head. So if you were to draw a circle, it's one line. Now, if you were to draw a cow, think of how to draw that cow without lifting up your pencil, which sounds really complicated. And it's actually much more complicated than this application, but that's the idea, is to print each layer with as few Z hops and printer travels as possible. It's better for speed, it's better for stringing, uh, less chance of nozzle collisions flying when you're flying around. Um, and you don't have to deal with, pressure changes in the nozzle as much. It's just a nice optimized way of printing layers. And if it's on your first layer, you can use that to eliminate your islands, which are prone to failure. So basically, I use Prusa Slicer, and Prusa Slicer can tolerate, I think, about a point or 0.1 millimeter gap. I think you can probably change those in the slicer, but 0.1 millimeter is a good idea for your cut because even though it's a gap in the model and it's a gap in the slicer, when you actually print it, those two walls on that cut are probably going to merge just because of the basic tolerances of a printer. Now, if your printer is super accurate, that may not be the case. It may actually print as a gap, but even if it does, it's pretty small and self-supporting. So here's another example. We have these through holes for the attachment hardware, and the whole thing has a cut through it. There's a cut through here, the other one, and there's also a cut here where the zip tie connects. Well, there should be. May need to re-export that. But in any case, yeah, cut your islands. Join all your islands together, especially on the first layer. It's not as important later on if you're just focused on reliability, but on that first layer, do your best to introduce these, optimization cuts into your print. And then the third thing that I did, which you may think is a aesthetic decision, is I added these side cuts into the print. Okay, so you have these circular cuts into the edges, whereas the original is completely smooth, no cuts in the sides. I did that on purpose to help reduce the chances of warping. I did a lot of tests with some rectangles, just printed them with and without cuts of different sizes and different spacing, and simply adding these 5 millimeter cutouts spaced out onto your print. If you have a long print with a lot of perimeters, it can really help reduce warping. Now, it may not eliminate warping depending on your print, but just having these will reduce it by a good amount. Another thing to point out with these is there's some really important geometry here on the clamp for the bracket. So this is where the rod goes, and then you bolt it together. And because of that important geometry, I didn't want to cut into it, so I just made those warping relief cuts at an angle, so they don't go completely vertical. So just to recap, number one, avoid cutouts. They're actually not as useful in 3D printing as they are in other types of materials, especially for the kind of light duties that most 3D printed designs are going to be used for. It introduces a lot of problems, potentially. Number two is connect your islands with these 0.1 millimeter cuts. It improves your first layer reliability, and it optimizes a lot of travel moves in your print, which can save you a lot of time. And then number three is if you have a part that's prone to warping, consider adding these side cuts to the print to give it some built-in resistance to warping. Okay, avoid those very long straight perimeters, because that's really what's going to curl your print up. And that's it. Thanks for watching.